Hey, how's it going? It's Nick here. Welcome back to my print shop. And so today I'd like to impart just kind of three pieces of my workflow that help me kind of conduct Linocuts in the most efficient manner. So these are three tips that you may or may not have known, but I think that they can be used pretty much for anyone who's doing Linocuts, and it'll kind of help speed up and make your workflow a little bit more efficient and help you kind of get nice and better prints. And so my first tip is kind of sanding or shaving the linoleum nice and smooth. And so mostly this only applies if you're going to use this kind of traditional speedball battleship gray or the Blick kind of golden linoleum. These more traditional linoleums are very hard, incompressible. Well, you can still squish them, and you feel them, they feel kind of smooth, but they can get smoother, trust me. This doesn't really apply to that terrible and ungodly Blick Wonder Cut stuff. This is just too rough. It doesn't really sand down very nice and easily, and it doesn't really apply to this, the clear or the more vinyl-like linoleums. These are already pretty smooth on their own. What I do is I take a razor blade or a utility knife blade, and it doesn't have to be a fresh one. I often like to use used ones, and you just kind of go back and forth across the surface of the linoleum. And what that's going to do is kind of take off the peaks of that linoleum, and you're going to get a really nice, smooth, and fine surface. Why would you want to do this? And so if you've ever printed nice, rich, solid blacks on your Linocut, you might find that sometimes they have a kind of salty or staticky texture to them, and this kind of the texture of the linoleum coming through and making it harder for you to ink up, or your linoleum's holding on to too much of the ink when it should be releasing it more. And so when your blocks are really smooth, that ink's not going to want to stick to your block, and it's just going to all transfer up to your paper, resulting in much crisper, cleaner prints. And so it's a small step you can do, but I think it really helps you and it helps with the quality of your prints, especially if you're going to print nice, big, flat black areas. But be warned though, it does make it a little bit harder if you kind of draw on it. Your transfer is going to wipe off easier because, again, nothing wants to stick to it, and so you might want to use Sharpies when you draw on it, because that can kind of soak in and dye the linoleum a little bit better. Which brings us to my second tip, which is staining your linoleum before you start carving. And so I know a lot of people already do this, but I guess not everybody knows it, and so give it a try. If you're going to print black and white like I often do, I recommend trying to stain your linoleum with a black India ink. I like to use the Higgins brand one, which is a little bit more expensive, but it's a shellac based India ink, and so it's really resistant and it doesn't quite come off when I'm cleaning it. I also like using this Blick brand because it was really cheap and I got a big bottle of it and I'm still working on it. This, I'm not exactly sure what it's made of, but it does hold up often like the Higgins brand does. I've tried the Speedball brand one, and I find that this one, it tends to come off my block whenever I clean it with mineral spirits. It's probably an oil-based India ink, I'm not quite sure, but I don't quite like this one as much as the others. But in terms of carving, they both get the job done. All of them get the job done. And then you can still draw on top of it with some pencil, or you can do transfer paper. You can even draw on it with Sharpies, and you'll still see them. I like to draw on them with a pencil, and that way if you kind of turn it into the right light, you can see your lines, but if you turn it away from the light, it'll kind of disappear those graphite lines, and you kind of get a better idea of how your image is going to look. But if you stain your block black, you're going to have a really nice idea of what your print is going to look like. And so you can start tweaking things like contrast, readability, your value scales, stuff like that, all before you start printing. And so if you want to get a better understanding of how the reductive process works, I feel like this is one of the best ways to kind of help ingrain that into your head. And if you're not going to print in black and white, so you're going to print in a color, you can also stain your block with an acrylic ink. And so in this clip, I'm using a red ink, no particular reason. I know a lot of people just use red, but you could really use any color you want. If you're just going to print a one color print, you can do that in the color that you're going to print with, and so you'll get a better idea of how it's going to look when it's done. If you're going to do a reduction print like I'm doing in this print, I would just recommend don't use the color that you're about to print in. Say for example, if I'm going to print in this light yellow color, I wouldn't want to stain my block light yellow because when I ink up, I'm not going to know which spots I've inked and which spots I haven't, because the whole thing is just already going to look light yellow. And so just kind of pick a different color than what you're planning on using. And you might be wondering, will this transfer from my block to my paper? And the answer is probably, unless you seal it. And so in this clip, I've stained my block with a red acrylic paint and I've drawn on it with Sharpie. And if you've ever drawn with Sharpie on your block and you try to print some sort of transparent or light color, you know that it absolutely does transfer from your block to your paper. And so if you seal it, it doesn't really do that anymore. And so after you finished your drawing, I recommend taking some workable fixative. I use this Krylon brand one here just because I have it left over from my drawing days. And you just kind of give it a few passes, just kind of like 2 heavier passes. You don't need to make a puddle on the surface, but a little bit more than you would do if you're trying to seal a drawing. And so once it's been sealed, it'll keep your drawing affixed to the block. And if you don't draw on your block with Sharpie, say you use graphite pencil or charcoal, or you just do an iron oxide transfer or something like that, you can also spray it with a spray fixative and that won't go anywhere. Even if you're doing multiple layers, that'll stay onto your block. And so this block that I'm working on in this clip, I've cleaned it probably 9 or 10 times at this point, and my Sharpie lines and my stain is still there. And so speaking of cleaning, that brings me to my next tip, which is how I clean my blocks. And so I know a lot of people don't clean their blocks, but I think there's a lot of reasons that you might want to clean your blocks. And so reasons you might want to clean your block: if you print your block and you notice you missed a spot and you want to get back to carving, you don't really want to carve on your inked up block, because once you shave or you carve that little piece of lino, that shaving is going to go and stick back down to the ink, and it's going to kind of create problem, which is not fun if you have to do multiple lines. Second reason you might want to clean out your block: maybe you put on too much ink, or your ink was too loose and it filled in a lot of your fine lines. And if you've ever filled in your fine lines, you know that ink in those cracks is going to persist for a few prints. And so you might find that it's better just to clean your block completely and then just kind of start over again printing. And then the third reason you might want to do it is to preserve that nice smooth texture on your block once you're done. And so at the beginning, we shaved our linoleum and we made it really nice and smooth, and we want to preserve that nice and smoothness the next time you print it. If you leave the ink on the surface, it's going to be really textured, and we're going to be back with kind of textured block, not wanting to release all of the ink. And so I think it's good to clean it before you put it up in storage, and you don't have to wait like 6 days for your block to dry. Simply, you just get some mineral spirits, and then you just kind of dump it onto your rag, wipe out all the ink off of your block, and then we're going to take some talc powder and brush it over the block, and that's going to absorb all of the excess mineral spirits that was on the block surface and in those cracks. And you need this talc powder because if you don't, and you have mineral spirits still lingering in these cracks or on the surface of your block, it'll create a resistive spot that won't want to print when you try to print the next time. Or you can wait naturally for the mineral spirits to dry after like 20 minutes. And if you don't have talc powder, that's fine. You can still use cornstarch or baby powder, whatever you have lying around. I just happen to have this nice talc brush right here that helps me easily apply it. But I've just used baby powder, dumped it on there, and then just kind of sweeped the excess into the trash can with a blue towel. It all works out. And if you're not a solvent person, you can also use vegetable oil. Before I became a mineral spirits kind of guy, I used to use vegetable oil to do a lot of my cleanup. And so you can just use vegetable oil, just dump a little bit onto your glass slab, use a blue towel, soak your rag, and then wipe off the surface of your block. Grab a blue towel that's dry, and then just kind of wipe off the excess vegetable oil, and then brush in the powder afterwards. And it works the same. Vegetable oil is just going to take a little bit longer because it's not quite as powerful as the mineral spirits. But that's another option. And so you can go straight back to printing, which is really nice. Or if you want to go straight into carving, you don't have to carve with your hands resting on top of sticky block. it's ready to go. You know, the block's nice and dry. Your hand's not going to get messy when you carve it. And if you want to put it into storage, you don't have to wait a few days for it to dry. You can just go ahead and put it away. So yeah, that's 3 of my tips that I've picked up over the years, and I feel like they've really helped my workflow. If you got some tips of your own, leave it in the comments. Maybe you'll help someone else. Hopefully I helped you out today. But thanks for watching. That's what I've got for you this week. If you enjoyed this content, I've got more Linocut stuff coming up later. And so I teased a little reduction print that I'm working on. Hopefully that video will be coming out soon. And I'm also about to release a video about who has the best gold ink. And so I'm going to get all the brands of gold traditional ink that I can get my hands on and see how they stack up against each other. And so if that sounds cool, consider subscribing. But thanks for watching. I actually cut my hair for this video because it was getting really long, but I don't want to go out and get a haircut just so I can film this video. And so I actually tried to cut it myself, and I've been trying not to turn my head too much, but I couldn't cut the back, and so I have a really long, like the back of my head is just like a full 1.5 inches of long hair. I guess it's mullet time.